Story 1. The Beach House. I've had some unusual experiences in my life, but this one stands out, and I continue to think about it until this day. When I was a teenager, my parents rented a beach house from a friend at work. They lived in New Jersey, and the shore is the place to go. The house was in a small town that had its own private beach. The house is situated right on the bay. Walk out 100 feet, and you have your own crabbing dock. It was located on a dead-end street, so the evenings were very quiet. Being a teenager isn't easy for a girl. The mood swings were horrible enough that you didn't even like yourself most of the time. But I believe that the raging hormones also increases your sensitivity. I was not told much of the house before we left, other than where it was located and a vague description. We arrived late, close to midnight. As I said, it was very quiet. You entered the house from the back. The front of the house was built facing the bay. The first room is a guest room of sorts. It's small, maybe 8 by 8. There's a hallway towards the far right. The kitchen door is on the right side, and a little bit further, the door for the only bathroom is on the left. Facing the bathroom door is the cellar door on the opposite side of the hallway. There's always a darkness in this area. I can't remember if it was lighted or if it was just my memory that it was always a dark patch. The hallway is about 7 foot long. You walked right into the family room, 2-story vaulted ceiling, A-frame with a boulder fireplace to your right. Windows surrounded the living room, giving you a very open feeling. The unusual aspect of the room were the stairs leading up. When you were standing and looking towards the hallway, you saw the second floor with 2 bedroom doors side by side. The entrance to the stairs was cut into the wall and situated on the far left corner. It was decorated in a sailor's theme. It was very pleasing and well worn. When we arrived, my parents and my sister went directly through the house and outside to look at the bay. I don't know why, but I stayed inside alone. I sat in a chair facing the second floor, and I felt a vibration, a presence. I just don't know what to call it. It was in the far right corner of the narrow catwalk where the bedrooms were. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling of fear was so strong. I left to join my family outside. I went directly to my mother and asked if the house was haunted. She replied, "How do you know?" My mother is a very intelligent woman, but she also has a very open mind when it comes to other senses. There isn't much more I remember about my first trip other than my mom mentioning pictures were taken in the house by other guests who caught a hazy shape on the film. You see, the previous owner was a doctor who specialized in cancer research. His daughter was diagnosed with leukemia and died when she was just 16 years old. The really interesting things happened when we returned the following year. I brought my friend Monica with me, and her boyfriend came along. I did tell her that there was something there, but she didn't believe me. The first night Monica and I slept in the bedroom upstairs, right next to my parents' room. It was late, and we were cutting up, laughing. You know, we had a case of the giggles. Around midnight, we both decided it was time to go to sleep. I was on the inside of the bed, and she was right next to the door. The door wasn't closed all the way. After turning off the lights, not seconds later, we both heard creaking on the stairs, then a knock on our door. We were staring at the door, hearing it, but not seeing anybody at the door. We both agreed that we needed to leave that room, so we ran downstairs and kicked her boyfriend out of the guest room, and we went to sleep. I woke up to booming noise, like someone was banging on pipes. Then an old alarm clock in the kitchen started blasting music, and the channels on the radio began to change very quickly, as though someone was turning the knob from one side to the other. We stayed in bed. I was frozen in fear. Her boyfriend got up and turned it off, and he never accepted what had happened. That morning when I went to the kitchen, I noticed that it was unplugged. I asked him if he was the one that unplugged the clock radio, and he said no. I asked my mother if she had heard the sound. Neither her nor my father had heard it, and neither one of them had unplugged it. There was always a feeling of being watched in this house, a prickle on the neck, tensing of muscles. You would look around, and there would be no one there. What stood out was when I was walking to the bathroom. I would move quickly through the hallway. It felt like there was a weight on my shoulders, and I could never look at the basement door. Even when my father needed help, I just couldn't go down those stairs. The next year, after telling my other friends I was taking down to the shore with me all the ghostly episodes that happened in the house, they were disappointed. I walked through the door, and the house felt empty. Nothing happened. We had a great time, but there was just nothing in the house now. No spirits. My mom told me something interesting after we returned home. Before we went down that last time, the owners had cleaned out the basement. They found a lot of the previous daughter's possessions and got rid of them. I guess she went with them. Story 2. Grandpa's Last Cup. My maternal grandmother was a practical, down-to-earth woman, having been in a subsistence farming family throughout her life. If you didn't grow it, you didn't eat it. If you couldn't trade for it, you didn't have it. And she was religious, having attended the local meeting house church her whole life. She would never tell a story. Lying was a serious evil in her eyes. Nevertheless, she experienced paranormal phenomena her whole life. She took it in stride, figuring God was in his heaven and he knew what he was doing. And since I knew her never to tell a lie, I always took her paranormal stories to be absolute truth. In fact, she considered one particular experience to be sort of a gift from God. My grandma and grandpa had been married since they were very young. They had been together all their lives, and they were in their 70s now. They had eaten breakfast, and my grandpa headed out to the front porch just like he always did. My grandma would clean up the kitchen, make a fresh pot of coffee, and join him on the front porch to talk and pass the morning together. As he left the table, my grandma asked my grandpa if there was anything else he wanted, and he said, just a cup of coffee, and headed through the small house to the porch. Before he got there, he fell to the floor and died. The doctor told my grandma that there was nothing she could have done. He was dead before he fell. But my grandma still worried. It bothered her. It was very hard for her, and she missed him terribly. And she felt bad that she never got to say a final goodbye, or I love you. But that is not what bothered her the most. She was worried and upset for some reason. She couldn't forgive herself for not fulfilling his final wish for a cup of coffee. Somehow to her, that was a promise of a dying person, and she felt very guilty over not being able to carry it out. She was a reasonable person, but this nagged her at night and at day. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had done something unloving and irresponsible. One night, several months after my grandfather's death, she was laying in bed, going over it all again, wishing she could somehow have given him that last cup of coffee he wanted, when my grandpa walked in. Grandma said she wasn't frightened at all, just a little startled. She said her first thought was a sinking feeling that maybe he didn't make it to heaven. He seemed to be able to know what she was thinking, and assured her that all was well, but that he was worried about how she was worrying over that cup of coffee. She said she got out of bed, made a pot of coffee, took it out to the front porch, where they sat and talked things out. She said it seemed like they talked for hours and hours, but eventually he told her it was time for him to go. Before she even asked the question, he said no, he wouldn't be able to, or wouldn't be allowed to come back and visit anymore, but that he'd be waiting for her. She woke up the next morning thinking about what a strange, realistic dream she'd had, until she went out to the front porch and saw 2 chairs pulled up and 2 coffee cups. She never worried about that final cup of coffee again. Story 3. The Evil Cherub. I was sleeping in bed while my parents were outside on the stairs of our building. I woke up for some strange reason, and when I looked to the side of my bed, at the floor, I saw something semi-transparent and red rising through the floor. My room has no windows, and my room was pitch black. I was in shock. I couldn't move at all. All I could do was stare in total fright. When the creature's full body came up from the floor, it began walking back and forth, but its steps weren't solid. It bounced like a balloon with each step it took. It was small, maybe 2 feet tall, and its body was round like a cherub, but it had small horns on either side of its head. It continued pacing, or prancing, back and forth. It's strange, because he wouldn't look directly at me the whole time. I'm kind of thankful for that. I think I would have died of fright if he had. This continued a while longer, and then suddenly he just disappeared. And then I started to hear banging on the walls of my room. It sounded like a giant was banging on my walls. That's how loud it all got. All I could do was hide under my covers and pray that it would go away. After a few minutes, it did stop. I knew that it wasn't my imagination. You see, my aunt had just bought the apartment building. The only ones living there were my family on the 4th floor and my aunt on the 1st floor. The rest of the apartments were being fixed up so that new renters could eventually move in. My family was very conservative. They couldn't have been playing pranks on me. They just wouldn't do that. This creature would continue to visit me repeatedly for several years. Sometimes it even caused me to kind of levitate. I would be just about to fall asleep, and suddenly my bed would not be under me anymore. I'd be kind of floating. Upon that realization, I would spring totally awake and then come crashing back onto my bed. It all stopped when I turned 16, right around the time my aunt died. Maybe my aunt is protecting me. I do feel her presence around me sometimes. I'm grateful for her love and her protection, but I'd really like to know what that evil cherub was. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. Bye.